Couple more days of Japan Cuts 2020, get some tickets, review 3 of 3. When I was selecting which discs I wanted to use in the thumbnail for my review of the Criterion Channel, I only had one real goal in mind, which was show that I own a copy of Nobuhiko Obayashi's 1977 feature debut, House. Now, this doesn't mean much. If you're watching this video, you probably also do. It's not like I was holding up Criterion's long out-of-print hard-boiled DVD or like any of their Laserdiscs, something that would actually make me a really cool person with lots of friends. But House really feels like one of the most unique spine numbers in the entire collection. It's one heck of a movie, and I remember the first time that I heard about it, which coincided with its addition to Criterion in October of 2010. A guy on my dorm floor freshman year crowded all of us around his laptop to show us this bonkers trailer where a girl gets eaten by a piano, among other oddities, and I was like, yeah, why the heck not? And so I watched it with him, and then again on my own, and then again on the big screen, and of course, I own the Blu-ray. But I'd never seen any of Obayashi's other films, at least not until Monday, because Japan Cuts saw fit to program his final film, Labyrinth of Cinema, which was made while he was undergoing treatment for lung cancer, which he sadly passed from in April. And it's not a film I could review normally. It would take literal weeks of dedicated study of Japanese film and history for me to feel actually qualified to talk about Obayashi's 3-hour epic. But because it's part of the festival and I'm doing these shorter, looser videos, I wanted to talk briefly about my relationship to this particular sort of cinema, because it's kind of complicated. Usually when I see a movie I really enjoy, I want to jump into that director's filmography. But other times, I just watch House a bunch and I'm good. I love House, but it's not really my kind of movie. At my first ever New York Film Festival as a critic all the way back in 2011, I was sitting in the Walter Reed Theater next to some random guy who was the only person even sort of around my age. And to make conversation, I asked what he had thought of Steve McQueen's Shame, which had played at the festival a few days earlier, and I had absolutely loved. He said he thought it was fine, but wished it had been more experimental, like McQueen's debut, Hunger. And I hated him immediately. Look, I also have the Criterion Blu-ray for Hunger, but I sure don't like it as much as Shame or any of McQueen's other movies, precisely because it's more experimental. And that's just not my jam, and it especially wasn't back then. I was just rereading an article I wrote for Flixus.com around the same time about House, and it really emphasizes just how obnoxious I was, what with my bragging about not being interested in the deeper meaning behind movies. Fucking kill me, Jesus Christ. And yeah, I'm at least marginally less awful now and get some actual enjoyment from out there artworks, but let's be honest, a lot of it's still pretty superficial. I may go to MoMA now because I'm actually interested in looking at modern art itself and not just the person who wanted company there, but with only the rarest of exceptions, I don't try to understand it. And perhaps that's in part because it often seems so sincere and I have a viscerally negative reaction anytime I'm faced with true sincerity. And while Labyrinth of Cinema is certainly sincere, it also starts with these extremely strange credits that call out some actual person who has no bearing on the film, followed by a dude on a spaceship talking while giant fish float around, but these fish don't appear to be floating in the spaceship. They're just big fish hanging out on the topmost layer of the project file. Presumably this was done for a reason, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe he just wanted to put fish on screen, and that is where I connect to the movie, because my appreciation is genuine, but also absolutely ironic. Nothing about 3-hour avant-garde anti-war film told using the poems of the late Chuya Nakahara sounds appealing to me. But the specificity of Obayashi's style makes those 3 hours feel like they go by in both half and twice that amount of time. This film feels like the epic that it is, but you're never in a single place or moment for very long, meaning there's no room to get bored or check your phone. The only reason you do that is if you just became overwhelmed, which is a very real possibility. Labyrinth of Cinema has less in common with the movies that I generally watch than it does the TikToks. The constant jarring cuts and effect overlays, use of subpar CGI, and green screen effects that make no effort to actually convince you that they're real, and despite using high-end cinema cameras, oftentimes have the same sort of color halo that you saw in-house. The whole production has some real Gen Z freneticism going on, and I'm very much a fan. Of course, House wasn't so dissimilar, but what makes me really think about the modern internet as I watch Labyrinth of Cinema is that it's trying to teach me something. Like Obayashi's previous 3 films, Labyrinth of Cinema is an anti-war movie, but this time he is going for something more semi-fictional. The premise is as follows. A movie theater is shutting down in Obayashi's hometown of Onamichi, Hiroshima. And for their final night, they will be showing a marathon of Japanese war movies. And it is a packed house, here to see the place off. But these are not real war movies. They're representations of war movies that are being used to tell the story of the country and its cinema and its history of war over the centuries. And the film cuts back and forth between the theater and the movies, using 3 members of the audience as a connective tissue as they find themselves sucked into the movies after the theater is struck by lightning, donning samurai outfits or soldiers' uniforms and moving through the eras. And it's hard to keep track of it all, especially as we get deeper, because there are constant callbacks to earlier scenes, and eventually we reach the point where we'll see one of the audience members as a soldier, and then see the same guy in the theater as himself just making a face, and then a flashback to him interacting with someone earlier, and then maybe see them do something, and then there's a voiceover from someone else entirely recontextualizing everything. And of course, there's extra wild shit on screen the whole time, like these frequent colorful text boxes that pop up that the Japan Cut subtitles mostly seem to ignore. I paused a few times and tried to use the Google Translate app to see what they said, but the auto translations were just nonsense. So I actually don't know if these were extra thoughts or subtitles used to punctuate moments, or maybe they were bringing pieces of poetry into the story as well as having it play between scenes. Maybe it was all or none of the above. But whatever it is, it's just another thing grabbing your attention. What Obayashi has made is a sensory assault, pummeling the audience into submission so that they will take in the message as a whole, even if moment to moment it is not really clear what's going on or why. This is a film about how war is bad, but it's also about how cinema is good and important, how it cannot change the past, but absolutely can change the future. And so it feels almost like the logical conclusion of the art form, and absolutely like a fitting final statement from a filmmaker who always pushed boundaries. I'm not giving this a score. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you particularly to my patrons, my mom, Hamrain Marco, Kat Saracata, Benjamin Schiff, Anthony Cole, @BlasianFMA, Magnolia Denton, Elliot Fowler, and Greg Lucina. If you like this video, great. If not, I'm sorry. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week.